Dear students, welcome to UGC MOOC on Human Rights in India. In this module, we will take up role of NGOs in the protection and promotion of human rights. What is an NGO? As the name suggests, it is outside the government. It is expected to be an independent from the government. It is a legal body, legally registered, of persons who come together for carrying out certain activities. There are different types of NGOs. For instance, there are some which work only on a single issue like children's rights, women's rights, bonded labor, child labor, and there are some who work on a range of human rights issues, and there are some which are confined to a particular district or a state, and there are some which work across the country or in a particular region of the country, and there are some uh, intergovernmental or international non-governmental organizations like the Amnesty International or the Human Rights Watch, and many other examples are there. So, there are different types of non-governmental organizations that are around. Now, what is their relationship with the other wings of the state? As you know, uh, the in the national human rights protection system, the NHRI occupies a pivotal role, and it complements the role of the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. The civil society, of which the non-governmental organizations are an important constituent, also complement the efforts of the other three wings of the state as well as NHRIs. In fact, the non-national human rights institutions act as a bridge between the government on the one hand and the non-governmental organizations on the other. Now, how do these NGOs advance the cause of human rights? They employ a variety of strategies in this exercise. For instance, let us take treaty monitoring process. Today, there are over 70 legally binding international or multilateral treaties that have been adopted under the auspices of the United Nations General Assembly, and they constitute international human rights law, and of which there are 9 core treaties. Now, countries sign and ratify them and undertake a variety of legal obligations. These include reporting from time to time, and the NGOs feed into this treaty monitoring process in a number of ways. For instance, a state which is expected to submit a state party report is supposed to conduct a broad-based consultation with various stakeholders across the country before it finalizes its report. The NGOs can feed into this process. In addition, the non-governmental organizations often submit what are called parallel reports, alternate reports, or shadow reports. They depict the reality in a different manner. In fact, the government reports quite often might claim that the picture is a rosy one as far as the protection and promotion of human rights in the country is concerned before an international audience, before the UN treaty monitoring bodies, while on the other hand, the actual reality at the ground level could be far from satisfactory. So, the non-governmental organizations, through their shadow reports, bring to the attention of the treaty monitoring bodies the realities at the ground level. In addition, when the treaty monitoring body engages with the state in issue in question, the NGOs are also prepare a set of questions that could be put to the state, and also eventually at the end of the process, when the treaty body gives a set of concluding observations or recommendations, NGOs also monitor the follow-up action taken by the states. They disseminate the recommendations of the treaty monitoring bodies widely within the country, and also monitor the follow-up action taken by the state, and where the follow-up action is deficient, they put pressure on the state to see that proper follow-up or implementation of these critical recommendations is carried out. The NGOs employ a variety of means. For instance, they file writ petitions before the courts of law or before statutory bodies like National Human Rights Commission, National State Human Rights Commissions, National Commission for Minority, Children's Commission, or SC or ST Commission, or the Central Information Commission or State Information Commissions, and seek remedy for an individual victim or a group of victims of human rights violations. Let me give you a few examples. For instance, there was a legal aid services forum in West Bengal, which was headed by a former judge, Justice D.K. Basu. When confronted with a series of custodial deaths, custodial violence cases which were reported in the media, the chairman, executive chairman of this legal aid forum wrote to the Supreme Court of India through a letter drawing its attention to these terrible atrocities, to this terrible human rights violation, and requested the Supreme Court to pass a series of directions. As a result, the Supreme Court issued a number of important directions which are displayed in all the police stations of the country, and these are monitored, and the court also made it clear that if these are violated, it would treat them as a content of the court itself. Now let me give you a few more examples. Javed Abedi was leading a disability rights organization. In fact, he was deeply concerned about how our transportation systems are not accessible to persons with disabilities, and how those who are using wheelchairs are unable to get into the aircraft in a dignified manner. Quite often their wheelchairs are physically lifted and they are placed in the flight, and which is a manner violation of their human dignity. In response, the Supreme Court directed the government to provide ambulifts which can take a person from the ground to the aircraft, and also provide them aisle chairs and other directions. In another case, the disability rights group complained against the Election Commission before the courts of law, stating that while on the one hand the Constitution of India provides right to vote, universal adult suffrage, but there are practical difficulties in accessing the polling booths, and this action by a non-governmental organization has in fact led to an important order by the Supreme Court of India directing the state to make these polling booths accessible by creating ramps and by providing other facilities to various categories of persons with disabilities so that they could realize their right to vote. Common Cause, which is another registered non-governmental organization, filed a petition before the Supreme Court of India on the right to speedy trial, and the Supreme Court also gave a direction that right to speedy trial is an important facet or a dimension of the Article 21 dealing with right to life and personal liberty. You take, for instance, People's Union for Civil Liberties, which is a nationwide non-governmental organization, deeply concerned about starvation deaths in Rajasthan. It moved a petition before the Supreme Court of India, and it's a matter concerning a right to food, and very important right in itself. And the Supreme Court issued notices to all the states in addition to the state of Rajasthan, and passed a series of interim directions over a course of decade or so on the realization of right to food, which is a very landmark case in the history of Supreme Court of India, and it is also widely regarded in many other countries of the world. So, the NGOs use the strategy of filing writ petitions or complaints to the national or state human rights institutions. In addition, they also seek non-judicial administrative measures or remedies from the central or state or local authorities. So, they also use the research and documentation as an important strategy. For instance, they work at the grassroots level, they work at the local level, they work at the state and other levels, and they bring out comprehensive, evidence-based, high quality reports on burning human rights issues. Let me give you a few examples. The Center for Science and Environment has brought out a number of studies on clean air, pollution, drawing public attention to the hazards, and also seeking appropriate steps from the government. Pratham, a non-governmental organization, brings out on an annual basis a comprehensive report on right to education of children and the state of its implementation, and which is again used by many scholars, government agencies and others for taking remedial action. Oxfam brings out a report on poverty, and these are only just a few examples. There are many other agencies, non-governmental organizations, which bring out comprehensive reports on serious human rights matters, and these are used by the national human rights institutions, used by courts of law, used by governmental agencies. In addition to these few strategies, NGOs also raise funds for their activities. For instance, as I said, they are outside this pale of government and depend on international development agencies, charities, foundations, etc. for their funding. The NGOs also build up alliances. In fact, when they build alliances with the like-minded organizations, they can draw attention to a cause quickly, and they can also collective energies and collective efforts to advocate for a human rights cause. For instance, there is a Jan Swasthya Abhiyan, which is a conglomeration of 20 networks and 1,000 odd NGOs and individuals working across the country on the realization of right to health. There is a National Alliance of Grassroots NGOs, NAGN, which works on child rights. So the NGOs often build alliances and use these alliances as a strategy to secure their goals. Uh, NGOs also use legislative advocacy for securing changes in the law reform or policy reform, and they also use media advocacy and use the internet, the digital media and online petitions and other internet based strategies for drawing attention to the serious human rights issues and also for awareness generation. In fact, naming and shaming has a critical role in the task of protection and promotion of human rights. Nobody would like to be known as a human rights violator and would like to avoid public ridicule, avoid criticism at any cost. So NGOs, through a clever strategy of media advocacy, can name and shame human rights violators and thereby secure better protection of human rights. Thank you.